And we're live. We're going to get into having a discussion about why I don't participate in spiritualism, spirituality, metaphysics, things of that nature, divine intervention, all those things. I'm going to get right into it as soon as we get some people here, in case you guys want to interject. Okay, I think I got enough of you guys here right now. So the reason I don't get into spiritualism, there's a multitude of reasons, but I guess the first part that I don't get into spiritualism is that we don't really know what it even means. If I ask an individual what they mean by being spiritual, I'm going to get like a slew of different things that relate to bettering yourself as a person, right? That you carry a more optimistic outlook on life, that you connect to the oneness that's in the environment. People will say like that you learn to be grateful for things, that you can learn to silence your mind. There's never like a clear definition as to what spirituality even means to people. And it's really concerning to me because a lot of times people say it's like, there's meditative components that are like tuning into the now. All these things can be like described with different words that aren't so woo-woo. So it really boils down to the fact that I don't buy into it, because it's like, if somebody says, okay, what I'm doing is meditating, and I'm saying like, yeah, what you're doing is just focusing on a specific thing. You're focusing. I try and not use the term meditating, and I use instead the term focusing. I'm focusing on my body. I'm focusing on my thoughts. I'm focusing on my problems. Meditating doesn't really make sense to me. The whole premise of spirituality itself doesn't make sense. So one of the main reasons I don't gravitate to spirituality is because it's not as clear and concrete as other things. Like the term automobile has much more meaning to me than spirituality, and it's like it's concrete. It's consistent. It doesn't change. An automobile is what it is. An automobile is tomorrow what it is today. It will be tomorrow what it is today. It's not going to change. It's consistent. And I think, unfortunately, in our world, when you deal with people who are spiritualists, who are kind of all over the place, they don't think about the little things that matter in life, like consistency. They can't wake up in the morning and be like, wow, the sun is up. Amazing. I can't believe it's back up again. I'm so glad that it is. That's how I think every day in the morning. I'm like, whoa, the sun's out. That's awesome. I made it through another one. That's amazing. Well, it's more confirmation that, that there's some level of predictability to the environment. I look at life from a scientific lens. And I think if you're going to be a good scientist, you have to relinquish yourself from this whole notion of spirituality. It's just not consistent, guys. It doesn't make any sense. There is no way to test spirituality. It makes you prone towards deviating from what the solution for a problem is. Like, let's say if I correct somebody's scoliosis or I help somebody with their pain, people will say, Nowdy, you're doing God's work. Or, Nowdy, you are a really good man. You are a man of God. And I just say, no. I just extrapolate variables and I try and solve problems. I'm not a spiritual man. I'm an individual who tries to focus on doing good math in an applied setting. That's what I focus on doing. And God didn't have anything to do with that, and the spirits didn't have anything to do with that. It had everything to do with me visualizing real things, consistent things, looking at footage, looking at anatomy, and then discerning information after I've looked at anatomy and after I've studied science. That's what enabled me to get there. People issue blame and credit in directions that they don't necessarily deserve. Like if I worked with an athlete and I helped them overcome their problem, if the athlete thanked God afterwards, that would be a slap to my face. If a client gets better utilizing my approaches and they thank God for me helping them solve their approaches, that's not God, man. That's me. And that's you putting in the work if you put in the work. So don't thank God. That's the whole thing. People, when you start believing in God and when you start buying into spirituality, what you start essentially doing is giving credit to things that aren't even real. And one of the biggest problems that we have in our world is being able to discern what's helping us from what isn't. Okay, my dogs are going nuts outside. I don't know what's going on. I may have to go out there and check out. Do you think there are things that we can't measure, we only see and hear within certain limits? Surely there are things that we can't understand, or we can. Yes, that's a valid question. MVKXXX. The problem is that most of the problems we need to solve in our life, most of the issues that are present with us in this reality, don't require us to measure things that can't be measured. Like we know enough to figure our shit out, and we just choose not to do it. So what does it matter? Oh, so there's things we can't measure. Whoopity-doo. We know if everybody had an average of 170 IQ and they had a kinetic intelligence that was around similar, and they had an emotional intelligence, which I think is directly tied into just a general form of intelligence. But let's just say if the average general intelligence or integrative intelligence was an 85 or 90, and we needed 120 general intelligence, let's just call it a score, then that's what solves the problem at this point. That's what solves the problem. It's not measuring things that are unmeasurable or trying to account for spirituality. It's nonsensical. Even the most devout spiritualists are starting to deviate away from spirituality. The Aubrey Marcuses of the world, they're starting to become less spiritual. They're starting to deviate and say, well, what are we actually doing? What are we entertaining? This is stuff that I saw a long time ago, guys. 12, 13 years ago when I read The Tyranny of Words, I was like, yeah, something seems wrong here. There was so many conspiracy theory documentaries that I gravitated to, and Zeitgeist was the one that I went hard. Well, there was loads of conspiracy theory documentaries, some that I gravitated to and some that I didn't. I gravitated to Zeitgeist because there was a point where he started talking about religion and that it's all pretty much, none of it's like supernatural, that most of the events that took place in religion could be correlated to some event or some storyline that somebody created out of their head a long, long time ago. So for me personally, guys, I've never had this attachment to spirit. I was an altar boy in the church for about 7 years when I was a kid, maybe more. And I never felt a connection to the divine or the Holy Spirit. I've never felt a connection to God. I never have. And even when I've gotten high and I think I've connected to some energetic being, I didn't feel like there was a creator. I didn't feel like that. So I run based upon where the evidence points me. And if there's no evidence to suggest that a God exists or that I should be praying or that I should participate in the abstractions that people tell me to participate in when it comes to people in the spiritual community, then I'm not going to do it because it doesn't do anything for me. And here we go. Somebody just tuned in and they said, what's your definition of spirituality? Catch me if you can, Sam. He asked, what's your definition of the term spirituality? That's part of the problem. That's the main problem. You can't define spirituality. We can define automobile. I can define door. I can define functional patterns, MP trainer. I can describe dolly, bricks, hardwood floors, yoga mat. I can define those things. You can't define spirituality. There is no clear definition to it. And we're kidding ourselves if we're even going to try to. There are points of frustration that I deal with when it comes to people. Like, they wake up in the morning and their toilet works every morning, right? Every day. And they just take that for granted. They're just like, oh, whatever. No big deal. No implications to that, right? It's like you wake up in the morning and you have somewhere this magic hole where you transport this nasty waste that comes out of your body that you don't want to be around. And it just goes into this hole and into the sewage system. Yet you then culminate this value system that says that we need to be grateful and blah, blah, blah this, and that we need to be grateful, that we need to establish mantras for ourselves, that you're good enough because you're connected to the spirit world. Like, it hurts my brain to think that I could turn on that light switch and be like, wow, that's amazing that I could turn on that light switch here and that light's probably going to go on. And if that light doesn't go on, that I could fix that problem by just simply changing the bulb. And if maybe there's a fuse that's blown out or whatever, I could call in the electrician and they could fix that, right? It really, really bothers me when people can see that you can get to a definitive solution to that problem, but yet when it comes to dealing with our own psychology, that we can't come to the same conclusions about how to fix ourselves. Like, we can't fix ourselves using the same methods. That we can't just find the mechanisms that correct our problems. We just simply can't do it. It's concerning beyond, like, I don't want to get violent, but I do say that, I will say that it's deeply frustrating. So when I see people that are like, oh yeah, I do functional patterns along with my spiritual practice. Look, like, it's not to say that I haven't met people who are spiritual who don't really want to get their act together, or they don't want to solve their problems. But if they go down this path long enough, they'll begin to understand that they're a machine just like an automobile, just more complicated, right? And yes, we are bioenergetic organisms. We don't operate the same as an automobile. But there are mechanisms that impact us every single day. And what I'm saying is that if you want to attain some level of peace and tranquility in your life, and then you need to think of yourself like a machine, and that the machine has needs, and that there's maintenance protocols that you need to have for that machine, and then there's things that you can do to soup up the machine. And that once you soup those things up, you're liable not to really care about the spirit world. You're just not going to care. Like, my dogs don't concern themselves with the spirit world. They concern themselves with having some kind of a job, feeling useful, and doing whatever they can to contribute to the household, as well as just getting food. They're pretty simple. They're more mechanized than we are. But humans somewhere along the way really screwed it up. They screwed it up. And of course we needed religion at some point because we're tribal, and we needed to converge around larger scheme tribalism. Like, we needed to scale up. And so we needed to identify gods and religions to get larger groups of people to abide by a given doctrine. But it's just, at what point do we give it, like, say, hey, is tribalism the way to go? Right? What are we being, like, tribal about? What are we connecting to? I just think it's really, really stupid, that's really the term, to align yourself with something that's so inconsistent. Spirituality is very inconsistent. It's not constant. It's not that it's evolving, it just shifts. And people just go around the same circle of delusion. I haven't gotten into it. I haven't gotten into it very much recently. But my God, man, it's perplexing that people still buy into the nonsense, despite the fact that it hasn't done anything to solve any problems outside of just bring people together to congregate once a week, or to get people together to be like, hey, look, we're connecting to the universe. I guess it's done that, but most of the solutions for the world came from people tinkering around with objects, and then finding ways to make those objects make our lives easier. And so for me, the deeper I tune into figuring my problems out, the more frustrating it kind of tends to become when I look at the things that people value, the ways that they approach solving problems. It's just like, bro, we can't thank a divine spirit for the solutions of our problems, because when you do that, you very quickly forget about the poor people who have to, like, make great sacrifices to keep a civilization like this running. The great sacrifice it takes for innovators to tinker around with physical matter or with mathematics to then solve problems. If you can't give credit, let me put it this way. If you don't give credit to people who solve the problems, you're apt to live in hype bubbles for the rest of your life. And I think that this goes even further into that, where in our society we have the Jake Pauls of the world who get credit when there's substantially better athletes that probably should get credit. But I mean, what should they really get credit for, right? And don't get me wrong, he's playing the game. I understand how this world works. You can't fault him for playing the game. He's doing it. But in our world, like, you get the Tony Robbins of the world. You get I don't even know who the David Goggins types of the world, who get all this credit for what they do. And it's the question that I always prompt myself on. The question that I always ask is, I'm like, what are these people actually accomplishing? What does this do? What does that guy running 200 miles do for me or anybody else? It doesn't do anything. Nobody needs to push that limit, right? The limit that people need to push is one that relates to our society understanding sustainability on a personal level and a sociological level. Does him running 200 miles do that? Does him running for 2 days straight do that? No. But people are very apt to want to give that guy credit for what he does because it's hard. But I'm like, you also want to know what's hard? It's looking at it all and then stepping back and saying, why am I going to do that? And instead, I'm going to actually focus on being productive instead of like participating in the crap that other people do. That's difficult. And you want to know why I say it's difficult? It's because there's much fewer people that do that in this world than there are the David Goggins types. It just gets scaled down, right? It gets scaled down. So instead of running 200 miles, they run 5 miles, 10 miles. They run to the capacity that their body can allow. David Goggins is obviously a great athlete, so he can run for 200 miles. He can do that. So he can push through the pain to get through that mileage. He's economic enough with the way that he runs and he moves his body to get through to that. And he's crazy enough to push through the pain. But so the problem is with spirituality is that when you start giving credit to things that don't make sense, that begins to extend into the rest of the world. And we don't give credit to the people that actually solve the problems. We don't focus on who solves the problems. We look at a guy like Jeff Bezos and we bash him. We look at a guy like Zuckerberg and we bash him. We look at individuals like this and we hate on them, even though you are watching me on this phone right now through his technology, through his software development, right? Because these nerds who deserve all the credit, not the divine spirit, because these nerds work their ass off, I'm able to get my message to more of you. And since I'm not spiritual and I don't placate to that nonsense, I only reach about 60-some people right now. A peak about 65 people. I'm seeing about 64, 65 people right now. So with that said, I don't like spirituality because it deviates from the hard work that people do to make this world a better place. I think the people, don't get me wrong, I know plenty of people who are spiritual who work their ass off. I know plenty of people who are. But the further I go down this path, the less spiritual I become. There was points where I'd be like, oh God, please help me. Oh God, if there's something out there, help me out, bro, because I need help. Right? I used to operate within those perspectives. I used to be like, you know what, the world's more mysterious than I think. And I'm like, no, the more that I deviate from that framework, the more I connect to these mechanisms and the more consistent outcomes I can find that will help me solve my problems and the problems of other people. That's how it works for me. And I would suggest that you guys try doing the same. I don't find that spirituality does, I don't feel like it does anything for humanity. I think that we could relinquish it tomorrow. If we replace spirituality with intelligence, my God, would we be better? And Johnny Eblin writes, spirituality doesn't make more intelligent organisms. Agreed? High likelihood, it's just a distraction. It really is. I guess it's just, if people are looking for clear answers to life's problems, and when they don't have them, they don't like dealing with the discomfort of just saying, I don't know. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with the unknown. I've never have. I've always been like, well, I'm not sure. Let's figure it out. It's always been like that for me. I guess your parents were spiritual since you went to church as a kid. Were your parents hard to talk to because of these topics, or how did they respond to you not believing in God? I'll tell you guys about that. My dad went to church more than my mom did, and it wasn't until something happened in my family life that something extreme happened in my family life that it jarred my mom to want to go to church. But it was more of a coping strategy than anything, and my mom has pretty much said that. She's told me, those exact terms. As it relates to whether it was difficult to talk to my parents or not, I just said, oh, okay. I just told my parents, I think I was about 17 or 18. I went to church one day, and then the preacher was talking about that people should be giving away 10% of their wages to the church. 10% of their wages. And I'm like, wait a minute, people already got to pay 30-some, 40-some, maybe 50-some percent of their money away to taxes, and then they got to allocate another 10% over to the church. For what? What is this place doing? It was after that point I walked out of the church and I said, I'm never coming back here again. I'm like, this guy's speaking like a businessman. And I understand it's like, I guess he could have came at it better. He could have been like, hey, look, guys, it costs money to be able to keep this place afloat, and we're not going to be able to maintain this unless you guys help support it. And I'll be like, yeah, that's fine and dandy. I get that, but there's probably some very wealthy people that were probably upholding that church too. It was a Catholic church. And so anyway, I went back to my parents maybe about like a month later, 2 months later, and I just said, look, Mom and Dad, I'm not sure if I believe in God. I think I'm leaning towards atheism. So my dad says, you don't believe in God? And my mom was always kind of been like, yeah, I could see it. I remember like back in the day, she told the priest, you know, this whole depiction that people want to talk about as it relates to hell, I don't know if I believe that shit. Because if God created us and he loved us, why would he want to torture us? It's like my kids could do whatever they want. They could mess with me or whatever, and they can make my life a living hell. I would never put them in hell. I would never do that. So why would God do that? And the preacher was like, yeah, I could see where you're coming from. That was my mom way back in the day telling that to the preacher. So my mom's a bit more radical when it comes to like entertaining more abstract concepts. My dad's a bit more conservative, but I remember I told my dad that, and he's like, well, who created the universe? I was like, I don't know. He's like, well, there you have it. And I'm like, no, Dad, just because you have an answer to it doesn't mean that you're right. And I was like, what? Let's give a hypothetical, Dad and Mom. Let's have a hypothetical. If I was a Catholic and I was an alcoholic and I was a violent criminal who hurt people and did things maliciously to be destructive to the environment and people around me, would that be better if I was a Catholic than if I was a really, really, really good person who wasn't Catholic? If God existed, who do you think that he would end up rewarding to go to heaven if heaven did exist? And they're like, well, I got to be logical about that. Yeah, he would reward the good person. I was like, look at me, guys. Do you think I'm a bad person? Look at me. You guys see how I am? Because I've always been a fairly good person. I've tried to be a good person. I've really, really tried. And so I'm like, you guys see me. You guys see where I'm at. Do you guys think I'm such a bad person? I don't do any drugs. You guys see that. I know I don't get the best grades in school and whatnot. But when it comes down to it, I'm there if people need me and whatnot. And I've always been fairly accountable and reliable. And I haven't done anything malicious intentionally to try and hurt people. So with that said, I mean, I compete. Don't get me wrong. You guys, I don't do anything malicious to people in my industry. I just think that people in my industry are a bunch of con artists and that it needs to be exposed for what it is. Because if it's not, then people just keep getting exploited by con artists. And that's what I feel like people in my field, for the most part, are. And so it's nothing malicious against the con artist. It's just more like, hey, bro, like, upgrade yourself or get the hell out of the industry so that way consumers can actually, get well serviced through either FP or whatever other systems out there that's achieving the standard of good training, right? So get out of the way or get better, one or the other. There's nothing malicious about it. And so my parents saw that at that time, obviously I wasn't a trainer at that time, they're like, yeah, I guess it makes more sense. That's fine. You don't have to believe in God. And they let it go. That was it. I mean, I'm very good at debating my points. It was a little more in depth than that at that time, but I've always been very, very good at making an argument. And so, yeah, my parents weren't that spiritual. My parents are utilitarians fundamentally, and then they are spiritual secondary. And on my end, I'm utilitarian, and maybe there's a potential for us to explore spirituality. But what I gather spirituality as being right now is people getting ahead of themselves. It's like people saying, hey, look, I'm going to participate in a polyamorous relationship. I'm going to allow my woman to have sex with other people, and I will have sex with other people. And then I'm going to expect to make this work out. And I'm like, I don't have a problem with polyamory as a concept. I just think that we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves if you want to approach a polyamorous relationship, because we would have to evolve greatly to be able to detach from being connected to one person for extended periods. We just have that within us. Our limbic brain prompts us to bond with individual people. And when bonds break or there's a distrust associated when you've made a connection, it messes with your head. It tinkers with your hormones. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for me for a person to say, hey, I'm going to engage in a polyamorous relationship. It's a big distraction, essentially. It's a big, not a big distraction. Yeah, I guess it is a big distraction. It's a big problem you're creating yourself when you decide to pursue a polyamorous relationship. I remember Aubrey Marcus and his circle of people that he was around were talking about polyamory and whatnot, and I'm just like, and there was people like applauding him and whatnot. And I'm sure there was a few people that would criticize and judge and say, bro, what are you doing? And I'm just like, yeah, bro, this is not going to work. It's not going to, especially as a man, it's even worse, right? It's like, especially coming under the parameters that he operates in, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Why would you choose to participate in something that's so nonsensical? It doesn't make any sense. So he participated in the polyamory. Time passes, and then he commits to a person who wants to give into a monogamous relationship. I haven't looked into his story recently. I don't know where things are at. I'm not sure if he's back into polyamory. I don't know. All I know is that I'm like, that's not going to work because you're getting ahead of yourself. Like, would I have somebody try a backflip if they can't walk yet? No. It's like you need to, there's scaling involved with things, right? You're not going to make somebody the CEO of a company if they can barely hold a job, right? Scaling, right? You need to understand scaling before you're going to give somebody certain types of responsibilities, right? That's simply it. If you want somebody to tackle a problem, then ultimately, if you want somebody to tackle a problem, you need to prepare them to be able to deal with that problem. And unfortunately, people don't think that way. And so when it comes to spirituality, I'm like, it's not that I'm opposed to the idea of spirituality or exploring the nature of consciousness or whatever. I don't have a problem with that. I just think that we're getting ahead of ourselves, right? I don't think I think our grocery stores, I went to Whole Foods yesterday and I was looking at the section where they have bars, right? Like meal replacements. I couldn't eat a single one. Not a single one. Not a single one of them had ingredients. If it didn't have grains, it had nuts in it. And if it didn't have that, it had industrial seed oils. Like some of them had even corn syrup. I was like, what? I'm like, this is, we're sitting here talking about spirituality, and I can't go to Whole Foods to get a meal replacement bar, a basic protein bar that doesn't have a bunch of crap inside of it. And we're talking about spirituality. What I'm simply saying is that we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think we need to understand the scale at which we're at and that we're closer to behaving like the primordial slime than we think. And that in order for us to get to those later stages of scaling up our consciousness, that we need to stop behaving like sludge, like stop behaving like slime. That's what I'm insinuating. And I know that to most people, they're like, God, that's a really morbid way of looking at it. But guys, go to a grocery store. Go to a grocery store and tell me what foods don't have some kinds of grains in there, industrial seed oils, or nuts inside of them. Go over there. Go to a grocery store. Look at it everywhere, right? Corn is a grain. And look at how much food has corn in it. Go look. And there's grander implications behind that. Monocropping and things of that nature has severe consequences on the environment. This is a technical matter. This is not a spiritual matter. It's a technical crisis, is what I'm essentially saying. And then when we start talking about God or anything of that nature, or spirituality or anything, we are getting ahead of ourselves. If people who were spiritual spent time, instead of like talking about spirituality, said, okay, how do we change the agriculture sector? What do we need to do? That would change things. And there's some people that are doing that, like the people that make the cassava chips and whatnot. There are improvements happening there. But before we get to that place of talking about spirituality, we need to have an entire systems overhaul. A grocery store should have 100% food, not 3% food, even less than that. It's even less than 3%, even at Whole Foods. And Whole Foods is supposed to be, a wholesome store where there's great fuel. Again, guys, this is so obvious. It's so obvious. And unfortunately, People like being stimulated. People like getting high. They like eating nuts, getting bloated, and then drinking wine or smoking weed to compensate for the dysbiosis they created in their body. They like that cycle. Like, let me eat something so it kind of kills me a little bit. It puts me in an inflammatory cycle. And then let me get high after I've made myself feel like crap. Like, let me create a crisis and then let me temporarily solve that crisis. Okay, awesome. Then the high wears off and you're like, oh man, like I'm sober, I'm anxious. Let me go eat something that puts me back into the crisis, and then I'll take a pill and then have that thing momentarily pull me out of the crisis. Instead of understanding, why am I in a crisis? What's this crisis that I'm suffering from? Maybe this crisis is a problem. Maybe it doesn't need to be here. Maybe I need to change. Maybe it's not spirituality. Maybe. That's what I'm trying to get at here. So I see how I think we're just jumping the gun by saying that we're going to pursue spirituality. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to studying the nature of consciousness or whatever. But there are obvious problems in our society that we need to overcome. There's obvious problems. And it's not spirituality that's going to solve it. Thank you for creating a path to help me get off my addictions. It took so long, but I'm sober for the first time in 10 years. See, like, that's an accomplishment right there, Nikita. You got to stick to it, though. Nikita, I'm going to hold you to that. And in about 3 years, I'll say I'm impressed. That pattern that you have, I'm not going to give you any acknowledgement for sobriety until you hold that together for the next 5 to 10 years. So, yeah. I'm not going to, like, if you're able to hold it, sometimes people got to get on medications or whatever to temporarily get by. I'm not saying that, but I will acknowledge people on their sobriety when they've done it for extended periods of time. Don't give her acknowledgement, guys. Don't start giving her, hands or whatever the hell. If you got to go back and forth with it or whatever, and you keep fighting the fight, that's fine, Nikita. But at the end of the day, sobriety, from what I can see, is the best way of solving the problem. From a scientific perspective, it makes more sense to find the feel-good hormones within your own body than it is to do it from an external intervention or from participating in extreme behaviors, which is typically how people also get high. These are like the exercise addicts and whatnot. In my opinion, everyone's core issues come down to their image of God. Example, are you harming yourself mentally by creating stress in your body discussing this? Disease starts in the mind. Catch me if you can, Sam. The reason that I have to have this discussion, Sam, is because people are stupid. And if people were able to just discern information like I did, then I wouldn't have to harm myself to get on this phone to have this conversation about people's stupidity. Crazy, right? So that's the thing, Sam. It's like, yeah, disease starts in the mind. No, it doesn't start in the mind. It starts with the environment. How about we do this? We could conduct a study, Sam, if you like. I take a bunch of depleted uranium and I put it around your house and I put it in your water and then you drink depleted uranium. And then after that, we can have a discussion about how disease starts in the mind. We can have a discussion about that. And the same thing goes if you have a bunch of diseased people around you who still value spirituality over being mechanistic and being functional, then ultimately they are going to impact how you are going to be treated in this life. For example, taking the prick in the arm, right? People are diseased, and now it's forcing many healthy people to have to participate in this act of injecting themselves with a serum that's supposed to be a solution for a problem when the solution for the problem has existed all along, which is, for the most part, just being really, really healthy, right? So it doesn't just start in the mind. That's a simpleton's way of looking at it, Sam, and I mean not to be condescending, but it's just that's how stupid people are in the society. And I think that your perspectives on this are highly flawed, extremely flawed. Disease does not start in the mind. Disease starts with the environment. The environment nurturing a set of patterns of behavior. Disease does start in the mind to some degree by being able to look at the variables that are harming you. But if you look at the variables that are harming you, that affects your ability to make money. And if you can't make money, you can't feed yourself or live in a house or in some kind of a enclosed structure that protects you, that we call, a home. So this is one of those situations. And Sam, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to put forth your perspectives. But no, disease does not start in the mind. Disease starts with the environment. If the environment is educating you to be an idiot and you make idiotic decisions, that's where disease forms. That's it. Disease starts with stupidity. That's what it starts with. The disease is stupidity, idiocy. And until we cure ourselves of idiocy, we are going to have, what's intelligence? Intelligence is being able to recognize patterns that are hindering you from they're hindering you from taking your next evolutionary step, right? And why do we evolve? The reason we evolve is so we become more attuned for survival, right? That's what intelligence is. If you don't have the intelligence to understand the things that are hurting you, then you die off. That's how it is. And what's one of those things that takes you out? I mean, it could be a comet in the sky. If we're not wise enough and we don't shoot a comet out from the sky or detract it from or deviate it from hitting Earth, then the comet takes us out. But in this situation, disease is what takes you out if you make stupid decisions. So it boils down to just simply being stupid. Would you say everything is rooted in decision making? Yes. And the level of intelligence that you have will determine how much of a benefit you're going to get out of making your current decision. If you make a stupid decision, you pay the price for it. That's what it is. So John X design, yes. So we're not operating in a spiritual crisis. We're operating in an intelligence crisis. And we lack loads of intelligence, and I don't think anybody is going to argue against that. Take a look around. There's a reason that our government officials say we either lock everyone down or we open everything up. There's no nuance. It's not like, hey, let's take the susceptible in our society to this illness, the ones that may get hurt, and then we develop a herd immunity amongst all the people that are who are willing to participate in this, who are young and willing to expose themselves and have them go out into society and behave normally, or not normally, to take precautions and whatnot, so that, like, to be healthy, right? To make healthy decisions and then expose themselves to the virus, so they develop some kind of an antibody resistance to the virus. And then within a matter of the next 6 months, we develop a herd immunity, and now the older people are going to be protected because now this illness is not going to be as present in the environment. Maybe not at all. If people were more intelligent and they were able to discern information, we could do that. But since the grand collection of people are so stupid and they're so easily exploited by authority or just by other people who are also stupid, we end up having to take this all or nothing approach to every single problem that we face in our reality. This is not a crisis of spirituality. This is a crisis of a lacking of intelligence existing in our society, in our world. That's what it is. And I have 70-some people here watching this with me, right? Think about the message that I'm putting forth. I'm literally saying that the solution for our problem is more intelligence, not spirituality, which just perpetuates more stupidity. And this is how many people watch it. Think about it. Would you say the belief in free will is being lazy and taking time to understand cause and effect relationships? The thing is, it's not that we have a range of options. We to some extent, we have a free will. There is a choice. You can either choose to go left or right. And depending on the level of intelligence that you have, the level of life experiences that you have, and how your brain is programmed, you're going to choose. Like, if I put a cliff in front of you, and I say, okay, either you have the option of either jumping off of the cliff or staying off of the cliff, most people are going to have a core level, a basic level of intelligence to not jump off the cliff because they understand what the consequences are, right? But if I tell somebody, hey, don't go run for 10 miles. Don't go do that marathon because it's going to hurt you. It's essentially a similar thing as jumping off a cliff, only you're not dying as fast. It's like it's like committing a slow suicide, so to speak, if you go down that path. But if you're too stupid to see that and recognize it, then it's not really suicide. You're just killing yourself like an idiot. So everybody has an opportunity to make a decision. And the environment, like I'm an environmental pressure. I have very good brain matter. I have very good tissue. And my tissue tells me don't do that specific thing because it's going to be more damaging to you if you do that specific thing. And so I don't do it, right? That's what's enabled me to get to where I'm at. I have a certain level of intelligence with my body. Does that mean I'm going to be a great engineer or something? No. It's like my intelligence has its limitations like anybody else. But this is a form of intelligence. I feel that I have a fairly good general intelligence. But ultimately, going back to that whole premise of free will, is there such a thing as choice? Yes. We have a range of choices that we can make. And if you are not well calibrated in understanding like the ramifications of a bad decision, then you're going to pay the price. That's it, guys. That's life. Very curious to know what your take on human design, the science of differentiation, which is all about decision making. I don't know about design. I'm not sure what you mean by that. As in somebody's architecting us. I don't know. It's like I don't think that I think some aspects of our development are relevant and some aspects of our development are irrelevant. We're still in the process of doing that, and it's like I think nature is kind of funneling us down a path, but I don't know. I have to think about that more, John X. I don't know. Spirituality creates detachment issues with this reality. Absolutely. It's one of the biggest problems that I have with it, and it's one of the most nonsensical aspects of it. It's like if you get high off your rocker doing DMT or shrooms or whatever, you're apt to become very apathetic to the situation that's around you. You'll just think, well, this doesn't exist anymore because the psychedelic realm seems more real because it's more stimulating. So therefore, this reality doesn't exist, so let me just behave like a piece of crap. Yeah, let me just live my path. Let me just live my role in society and behave essentially like slime, and just be completely fine with it and okay with it because it doesn't really matter. Yeah, spirituality absolutely makes people detached. That's a very good perspective, reconnection experience. We have limited choices based on environment, past experience, etc. That is accurate. Would you agree that the emasculinization, if that's a word, of males is causing a lot of these problems with decision making, particularly when it comes to solving problems in these current times? Alberto, that's exactly it. Alberto Alexander writes that. Yes, I would say that that's a huge part of it. The masculine, the quote unquote masculine, I mean, you could just like replace that term with like problem solving perspectives. And that would like kind of be a good replacement for that term masculine, because that's really what masculinity represents. It's just solving problems. Not sitting there being like, oh, I'm all anxious. There was a video, or somebody was telling me about Elon Musk. One of his babies wound up dying, and his ex-wife kept wanting to bring it up to him because it appeared that he was supposedly avoiding it, or blah, 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 this, blah, 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 that. And he said, look, if you bring up the fact that my child died, one more time I'm going to divorce you. She brought it up once again and he divorced her. And I applaud Elon for doing that. I'm going to give him a one-hand clap for doing that. Why does he need to keep thinking about that? Why? People die. That's just a fact of life. People die and you can't control it. But when they die, but one thing that you can control is making the world a better place. And if you make the world a better place, and we can account for infant mortality, then at that point you don't have to deal with the suffering of worrying of involved with losing a child when you're going to have one. So, is sitting there mourning and thinking about somebody who died in your past really going to help your future? Is it going to enhance the future, or are you just detracting from it? And guess what the feminine way of dealing with the problem is? To constantly think about, oh, this is, look, somebody died and blah, 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 this, and oh, it's so terrible. You need to get in tune with your emotions, and you need to like go through through a grief cycle and whatnot, because if you don't, then that means that you're just avoiding the problem and blah, 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 blah. Look at me, I'm a woman, I'm completely degenerated, and I have no idea how to handle my reality because men handle all the most important decisions in reality. And so let me just sit here and act like I'm actually solving a problem when I'm really just, I'm still trying to cope with my own mortality because I'm an absolute degenerate, right? Yeah, that masculinization, I believe it is a word, and yeah, but it's not being emasculated. I believe. I think it's more than anything, we're being drawn away from objectivity. That's what's happening, and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous because you're taking us away from our core skill, which is the development of tools and technologies to make our lives easier. This is how we solve the problems. If you want less infant mortality and you're worried about how your child dies, then what we need to do is develop better technologies and a better understanding of what prevents something like that, something so horrible as that from happening. Because I think it's terrible that it happens. But if somebody dies in your family or whatever, everybody's like, oh, we got to sit here and grieve. It's like, okay, cool. How about we just pay homage to what was good about this person and what wasn't? And we adopt the patterns of behavior that seem to be conducive towards success, and we relinquish ourselves from the behaviors that didn't seem conducive to this person's success. How about we take that approach to somebody dying? I'm not trying to be insensitive about it, but if I was to die tomorrow, I wouldn't want a bunch of people crying about it. I wouldn't want people saying, what could we learn from this guy's mistakes? What did he do wrong? What did he do right? What can we take from this person? If nobody cried if I died tomorrow, then I'd be like, awesome. If they just learned the lesson, then they got the utility of my behaviors. That seems much more conducive towards relevance to me. So yeah, I think in general, women are fucking everything up. The system is called human design. I don't know, John X. There's plenty of people who. There are many people who I'm assuming that they're. What are they like alluding to when they say human design? What does that mean? Like there's a God doing it. That the universe is shaping a human being, that Earth is shaping a human being. What's the design? If something's designed, then that means that there's a designer, that there's a creator that's making this thing. And the question I would ask is for what? I don't know. But never mind that. That's a pretty big speculation, and you can't really test it. You can't really test it. So I don't know. I'm not sure what they mean by what you mean by human design. I don't know. Spirituality can create detachment when you're using it to avoid problems. I believe the physical body feeds on food, mental body feeds on thought, emotional body feeds on emotions. I don't even know what you're talking about, Sam. I don't know what you're talking about, bro. Is this going up on your podcast on Spotify? I'm just practicing when I speak here. That's really what my objective is when I get here is really just practicing how I'm going to talk. So when I illustrate my points, they come out more coherently when I get on camera. Right now, I'm really just getting my repetitions in, guys. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. But then at the same time, I'm helping a few of you evolve along with me. Sorry, fam. My ovaries are fucking everything up. Fucking up, apparently. LOL. Yeah, I don't know. Do you believe you have a spirit? What happens when you die? I think the more important question, Brian, is who gives a fuck? That's the more important question. Why does that even fucking matter? Who gives a fuck? Like, I hate to break it to you, but stupid people ask that question. Like, what I understand is that some things, some behaviors are conducive to society evolving and getting better and the prevention of death from happening. And then there's other behaviors that, lead us to dying sooner. So there's a very simple answer is, do I believe that I have a spirit? I don't give a shit. What happens when you die? I don't care about that either. Because what's the sense in stressing about it or worrying about it? Who cares? Who cares? This is how stupid we are. This is how dumb we are. We think about nonsense that doesn't feed us. Like my dogs, they don't think about that. They're just like, hey man, I need a job. You give me a job. I'd like to have a job. And oh man, I don't have a job. I'm just going to go to sleep. And they just knock out. They go to sleep. They regenerate. They're like, oh, okay, I'm not working. Okay, let me just lay down and go to sleep for the next 30 minutes. I'll wake up and see if anybody needs me. Okay, nobody needs me. All right, so I'm somebody's walking outside. And my client's here. Come on in. Hey.
Oh, hey, come here.
Anyway, guys, I need to train. And yeah, I appreciate your time. Try cutting the spirituality bullshit out. It's not going to serve anything other than just confusing you. There are clear mechanisms to reality, and I think that if there is a point to it all, it's to understand those mechanisms and change. That's what makes the most sense to me, and that's how I orient my decisions in my life as a whole. I would suggest doing the same thing. It's proved to be very fruitful for me, and I think it would be really helpful for you guys. All the best. Bye.
Hey, need your bathroom real quick?
Yeah, for sure, man. Do it up.